Welcome to the Wellness and Disability Equa meeting. My name is Tona Butler. I am the co-chair. I identify myself as deaf. I wanted to share a few things with you today. We do have closed captionings enabled. So if you need them, you can click on the bottom where it says show captions. We also have an ASL interpreter available. Please make sure your name on the square is displayed correctly. We want to know more about you. Please fill out the demographic information using the QR code or link that is available in the chat. This information will help with further.
Did we lose you, Tana? Did you freeze?
Now we are moving on.
Oh, so you froze for a bit. So I just want to say that I got that demo form link in the chat.
Yes, it is in the chat. Am I still frozen?
Nope, you're good now. You can move on.
Oh, good. Okay. Now we're moving on to the land's acknowledgement. Can I get a volunteer to read the land of acknowledgement?
Can do that.
Thank
Was
you.
that Daisy?
Yes.
Thank you, Daisy.
Land acknowledgement. Riverside University Health System Behavioral Health acknowledges the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the indigenous peoples of Southern California, whose land it occupies. The Cahuilla, Cupeño, Luiseño, Serrano, Chemehuevi peoples and their ancestors have been here since time immemorial, caring for the land with great integrity. The first people honor the earth, animals, and plant beings, the water, and all peoples that lived here. We acknowledge this reciprocal relationship and intend to continue and extend the values of caring and emotional wellness to all Indigenous peoples, Native Americans, and residents of Riverside County. Our UHS-BH creates relationships built on trust and accountability with its community members. With this land acknowledgement, Riverside University Health System Behavioral Health commits to be respectful to and mindful of tribal sovereignty, culture, and beliefs of the indigenous peoples of this land.
Thank you, Daisy. Now we're moving on to the icebreaker. Please put into the chat your name, organization, and the answer to this question. What is your favorite breed of dog or cat, and why? You can also come off the mic and tell your answer.
This is Dakota. I like a greyhound. I had a retired racer when I lived in Colorado, and she was just the most gentle, sweet greyhound. Although I think next time I would get a Whippet or an Italian because she was a little big for carrying. You know, when we had tornado warnings, I had to go down the ladder in the cellar with this greyhound. Oh, David, how old is it?
She is now 10 weeks.
Oh my gosh, you're in for a year of fun.
She's already a little handful.
Yeah. Oh, they're so cute. You know, they call them otter paws. They have webbed paws.
She is all feet and legs right now.
Yeah.
She's just lanky and big feet.
And I love pit bulls because they are like little humans trapped in dog bodies, and they show all of their feelings to everybody. And I just love that about them.
Somebody here at the park where I live has, is it called Blue? Staffordshire Terrier. Just the most beautiful dog, silky, velvety. And Daisy put in the chat. Daisy, how do you pronounce that Mexican hairless dog?
They call them Xolo for short, but it's a Xoloitzcuintle.
Oh, wow. Is that the one that always wins those beauty contests? The tongues hang out.
They're kind of weird looking, but it's so cute. They're weird, cute way. Yeah. My
They have like
uncle
a
in Mexico
of-
has several. Well, he's a veterinarian, so there's like a club, so he has some. Yeah, they're so nice. You have to take care of like their skin. They're special dogs.
And Glennis says that she doesn't have a pet, but she likes German Shepherds, the most loyal working dog. And America likes the Cocker Spaniel. More of a, oh, cat. I had a thing covered. It said you're more of a car person. I was like, what, you take your dog in the car? Okay. You're more of a cat person, but you like the Cocker Spaniel. Yeah. Well, I think everybody's checked in with the icebreaker. Oh, yeah, Cindy. Awesome. My dog's got a little chow in it.
Community agreement. Keeping this space safe, making sure inclusion is a priority. Zoom bombing and the video, we could make changes to this if you have any suggestions. Should this meeting get Zoom bombed or disrupted, we will close the meeting and communicate via email how we will proceed. In accordance with our decision to be as accessible as possible, we will post a recording of this meeting on various RUHSBH websites. By attending, you consent to authorize us to post this meeting video online. Let's move on to the minutes of approval.
This is Dakota. So I'm just putting on right now the attendance from last month. So if you were there and your name's not on there, please let us know. And I will screen share the actual minutes themselves in a second here. So give you time to look at that. Yeah, okay. I'll just scroll down this and you all can just look it over. Let me know if I'm going too fast. It was Groundhog Day when we had the meeting. And so Madison won the trivia question for the Starbucks card. She knew Whistle Pig is the nickname for Groundhog. And she received her card. Daisy, there's your part. And these were the community announcements. And it was only an hour-long meeting, but we really got a lot done.
Can I get a motion to approve?
This is Misty. I will make an motion to approve the minutes.
This is Dakota. I second.
Thank you, Misty and Dakota. So here today to talk about the Mental Health Service Act and the Behavioral Health Service Act, which is on Tuesday's election ballot. Please welcome our Riverside County MHSA Administrator, David Shellen.
Oh, thank you.
I made you co-host, David, so you should be able to share.
Okay. And I think somebody was going to manage my slides, but if not, I can try to manage that.
Let me give it a shot.
I can share my screen, Dakota.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That'd be great.
And I haven't seen that Yoda picture. That's a Dylan Colt Yoda picture. I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen it in a long time. As I was introduced, my name is David Sholin. I am the Mental Health Services Act Administrator for RUHSBH. And that sounds really impressive, but what it just really means is I'm a large compliance officer over the regulatory funding stream, which is titled the Mental Health Services Act, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information about that in a second. Some of you may remember these kinds of meetings from last year, if you attended meetings that were like this, where myself or some of my staff may have come in and did a similar presentation about the Mental Health Services Act and some of our annual updates. So I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to, depending on time, I'm going to give you a little bit of update on a preview of the Behavioral Health Services Act, which is Proposition 1 on the current March ballot. So not that far away, I think March 5th ballot. So let's start with kind of just the basics. So what is the Mental Health Services Act, or you're going to hear me call it MHSA, and you may hear me create an acronym called MISA. It's just kind of like trying to pronounce all those letters together. They're all the same thing. MHSA is a California ballot proposition from 2004 that became law in 2005. It created a 1% tax on millionaires to generate a dedicated funding stream for public behavioral health care. Because the economy can change over time, and because this funding stream is based on a tax revenue, so can the amount of money that is collected under MHSA. It's important to note that MHSA has its rules, it has regulations, so it's not just a free pot of money that the county can use any way that it wants to. In most cases, funds cannot be used to pay for services in acute hospital or in institutional settings. By law, the county must look to other funding sources first before using MHSA dollars. These different pieces of funding streams become almost like the different pieces of a hair braid, and you'll hear that a lot of programs have braided funding. It means different funding streams have come together to fund that one program or project. As a result, department program development and MHSA plan development coincide. Stakeholder feedback, or the community participation process, is a part of that planning. Part of me coming here today is to be able to not only inform you, but to be able to get feedback at this early stage of the plan development as a way of being able to make sure that community is a part of this particular process. We formalized this process at the beginning and start of the year, where we have these kinds of presentations. You can go ahead to the next slide. So what is the MHSA plan? Well, in its most concrete form, it's a big report. It can get up to about 700 pages long. The report is used by the state to confirm that Riverside's MHSA expenditures were authorized by its county board of supervisors. It also records and documents our compliance with MHSA regulations for state and community review. But it's important to note that not all services are included in the MHSA plan, because not all services can be funded under the MHSA. So it's not necessarily can be used as a guide for services. There's more services in the department than are represented in the plan. Go on to the next slide. The MISA plan comes in two types. There's a 3-year plan, which essentially looks like just what it says, a 3-year plan. It looks like a treatment plan over the next 3 years. What kind of goals are we trying to achieve? And then there's annual updates, and those are more like progress reports. How are we doing on that 3-year plan? We had a new 3-year plan last year. It covers the fiscal years of 23-24 through 25-26. And this would be our first progress report on that plan. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. In addition to stakeholder feedback, the department's planning is informed by other sources as well. Most of these are data sources. They can come from state, federal, or county data. The department has its own research and evaluation team or unit, and it produces data. And it's also informed by trends that are happening currently in the world, such as the opioid crisis or the COVID epidemic. The programs in the MISA plan are primarily rolled over from year to year into the next plan in order to prevent service disruption. Yet community voices and research can result in the expansion or reinvention of programs, the termination of programs, or can start out trying new programs. Go on to the next page. Alrighty. So when you look at MHSA, it looks a little bit like a book. And that book has chapters, and we call those chapters components. MISA has 5 components, and we're going to go over each one of those components briefly so you understand what its intent is, and then say a little bit about what some of Riverside's updates are. Alrighty, the first component is Community Services and Supports, or CSS for short. It is the largest of the MISA components. It represents 76% of the MISA funding allocation. CSS establishes a high-intensity case management and therapeutic program called FSP. This is a 24/7 behavioral health intervention program geared towards folks who have the highest consequences based upon their mental health. Over 50% of CSS funds must be used on FSP programs. CSS also expands the rest of our outpatient service system. This includes adding peer support throughout our service system, as well as augmenting or growing positions in clinics so that we can serve more people. CSS also funds our housing and homeless programs, our crisis system of care, including our crisis urgent care centers, and our crisis mobile teams, and also partially funds our mental health courts, our collaborative courts, and justice-involved programs. And you can see there on the screen the 4 work plans that are inside our CSS component. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So what are some highlights in this year's CSS plan? Riverside has mobile crisis teams that are staffed with behavioral health professionals. They are now available 24/7. The mobile crisis teams include clinical therapists, case managers, addiction counselors, and peer support specialists. The mobile crisis teams are county-wide and have successfully diverted 70% of contacts from law enforcement and inpatient admissions. The community can access a crisis team by calling the Help Center, which is at 951-686-HELP, and they assist with triaging the call to see if it's more appropriate for the crisis teams or law enforcement or another agency response. Another crisis response program or team is the Community Behavioral Health Assessment Teams, or CBAT for short. These are police officer and RUH-SBH clinical therapist partnership teams that respond to the community to behavioral health related calls that are dispatched by law enforcement. Based on stakeholder feedback, the number of CBAT teams have continued to expand and currently include Menifee, Corona, Beaumont, Cathedral City, Palm Desert, Hemet, Jurupa, Paris, Thermal, Lake Elsinore, Riverside, which has 2 teams, Moreno Valley, Hemet, Indio, Temecula, and Murrieta. We move on to the next slide. The next component under MHSA is PEI, or Prevention and Early Intervention. It is the next largest component at 19% of fund allocation. PEI is unique in that it provides education and engagement to the general community, whereas CSS is designed to address the service needs of people with serious mental illnesses. PEI programs are designed to reduce stigma related to seeking behavioral health care, reduce discrimination against people who carry a diagnosis, and to provide services that could prevent the onset of a serious mental illness. PEI can also fund early intervention services for people with symptoms experienced for less than a year, or who do not meet the criteria of a mental health diagnosis, or who can benefit from low-intensity, short-term interventions. At least 51% of PEI dollars must be spent on youth under the age of 25 or their families. And you can see those Riverside work plans on the screen. Those work plans were developed out of community stakeholder focus groups, in addition to looking at risk data provided by the department as well as state and federal agencies. You can move on to the next slide. Thank you. And here are some highlights from the PEI plan. PEI administration continues to offer trainings virtually and in person available to the general community, focused on mental health awareness, self-care, trauma and resiliency, and suicide prevention. Trainings are free and available every month. For fiscal year 22-23, which is our last set of data, over 1,600 participants county-wide attended the 87 trainings that were offered. An additional highlight is that prevention and early intervention in partnership with the Suicide Prevention Coalition will offer short-term grief counseling for survivors of suicide loss at no cost to Riverside County residents. Family and friends of a loved one who have died by suicide are also at high risk themselves. This pilot will offer 6 to 8 free sessions to suicide loss survivors through community-based clinicians trained in suicide bereavement. Applications are being accepted continuously until a sufficient number of providers are obtained to adequately address the need or that funding is no longer available. You can find the application at RIVCOSPC, so rivcospc.org. So if you know anybody who is a clinical therapist, or if you are yourself and you're interested in the possibility of providing that service to the community, that's where you can find the application, as well as lots of other information regarding the Suicide Prevention Coalition. Okay, go ahead and move on to the next slide. The next slide represents the next component in MHSA, which is innovation, or we call it IN for short. The innovation component is funded using dollars out of the CSS and PEI components. These dollars are set aside by the state and require an additional approval process to access them. The innovation component is unique in that it is not designed to fill service gaps, but rather to advance knowledge in the field. Funds are used to design research projects that allow the county to explore new ways to improve service access or service outcomes. Innovation plans are time limited. For large counties like Riverside, that's usually 5 years. Riverside just ended its most recent innovation plan. It was a 5-year plan called Help at Hand, formerly known as the Tech Suite. This was a multi-county partnership plan that explored the use of modern technologies and smartphone applications to assist in consumer recovery. As I indicated, it expired last month in February of 2024. MHSA presented a new proposal to the State Commission that reviews innovation and approves innovation proposals. It was an eating disorder intensive outpatient and training program, and we are happy to say that it was approved. Dakota was at the meeting, at the actual meeting with the Mental Health Services Oversight Commission, and gave testimony on that particular project. And now we have actually had our first implementation meeting to be able to kind of get things rolling. If you want to read that proposal and that plan, it's located there on the screen, and it looks like Dakota just put it into the chat. My highlights, though, will come from the Help at Hand plan that had just ended. Again, it involved 14 different California counties or cities in collaboration to look at how those smartphone technologies or modern technology could assist in a consumer's recovery. Some highlights include the Take My Hand live peer chat. This provided live peer-to-peer chat interface using real-time conversations for people seeking non-crisis emotional support. Take My Hand was recognized as a California State Challenge Award recipient. The total number of Take My Hand chats from January through November of 2023 was over 1,600. We have also recently implemented a pilot using ASL video chat so that 2 deaf peer chat operators can offer support to the deaf community. This particular area of the plan is uninterrupted. So even though the overall plan has completed in terms of a innovations project, the department has integrated aspects of this plan into its overall service planning so that services aren't interrupted. Take My Hand is one of the projects that it will continue outside of the innovation project, and it's currently in operation. Another area of this plan's highlight I'd like to talk to you about today is called La Clave. La Clave is a culturally informed program for the Latina community that helps family members understand the initial symptoms of psychotic disorders using cultural references as teaching topics. The earlier an intervention occurs after somebody has had their initial psychotic break, the better the prognosis. La Clave content was also integrated within the Take My Hand mobile app and website. And most recently, Univision in Espanol and NBC Palm Springs reached out to collaborate with Help at Hand to promote La Clave in the desert region. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. The next component is Workforce Education and Training, or WET for short. The authors of MISA realized that MISA planning and programs are just words on paper without carrying practitioners to implement them throughout the community. Our current challenges with workforce shortages have exemplified that. WET was designed to address the recruitment, retention, and development of the public mental health workforce and to help allied professions better serve people who carry a diagnosis. WET funds were originally time limited and expired in 2018, but WET programs continue using a portion of CSS funds. The work plans in WET are up there on your screen. Some highlights from the WET plan include department training has included evidence-based practices. Evidence-based practices are proprietary practices that usually are too expensive to bring to the private sector. Utilizing WET dollars, we've been able to bring these practices to RUH-BH consumers, and we train our clinicians and make sure that they practice them to fidelity. Some of those particular practices are seeking safety, which is a trauma-based practice, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR, another trauma-based practice, trauma-focused CBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and specialized training for our eating disordered clinicians. WET offered a total of 407 continuing education units and 33 trainings that focused on advanced behavioral health topics. The WET internship programs continue to be one of the largest behavioral health internship programs in the Inland Empire. In the past academic year, the Graduate Internship Field and Traineeship, or GIFT for short, program coordinated internships for 37 master's and bachelor's level students countywide. Over 51% of that cohort is bilingual and 46% of that cohort speaks Spanish. Interns become a prime candidate pool for hiring new department therapists. Last year's graduate pool, for those that applied for work in the department, I believe nearly all of them were hired. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. The last component in MHSA is called Capital Facilities and Technology, or CFTN for short. There's been no dedicated funds for CFTN since 2013-14, but a portion of CSS funds again can be used to address new work plans. The focus of CFTN is to improve the infrastructure of public mental health services. This includes the development of buildings and electronic programs like our electronic records. Some current projects funded by CFTN are the Mead Valley Wellness Village, the Place renovation, which is geared towards folks who are chronically homeless. It's been around since the around 2011. It was needed to be renovated, and so they had started the renovation. It was due to be completed this year or late last year, and now the date has been extended to the end of this year. And a new project I'm going to talk to you about today is the Franklin Avenue Adult Residential Facility, which is a form of an augmented board and care. If you can move on to the next slide. Renovation has begun on an augmented adult residential facility on Franklin Avenue in the city of Riverside. When completed, this facility will be providing approximately 81 beds with integrated on-site full-service partnership services. The facility is expected to open in December of this year. The facility will provide the same level of services comparable to the department's existing adult residential facility located in Palm Springs, called Roy's Desert Springs and Windy Springs Wellness Center. Augmented board and cares is one of the areas in which the levels of care had depleted over time throughout the state. These allow folks who are at a higher level of care need to still be integrated into the community while receiving the supports that allow them to keep independence and stay well in those settings. So that completes my update on the actual components themselves. So what can you expect next in this process? MISA regulations include that a draft of the plan be posted for community review and comment. That draft is scheduled to be posted in April of this year, so next month. It's a 30-day posting where the community can read and comment on the draft. And then in May, we will have public hearings, which are an additional opportunity for people to be able to learn about MHSA and provide feedback. Public hearings traditionally have been one single in-person 2.5-hour event. But COVID put us in a place where we were challenged to become more creative because we couldn't gather in person. So we created a virtual method in conjunction with the Behavioral Health Commission that allowed people to view behavioral health videos, which I called Public Hearings in Your Pocket. These were videos of the public hearing in both English and Spanish. The English version also had video and video ASL interpretation that were offered for a 24/7 period of time over a 2-week period, and that people could watch them at any time of day. It gave them an electronic feedback form that they could utilize, or if they preferred, there was also a dedicated voicemail hotline that they could call and just leave their feedback verbally instead. We also gave folks the option of requesting a DVD with these videos on them that came in a self-addressed stamped envelope. So if they wanted to give feedback, they simply needed to drop their response in the mail. This virtual method has retained its popularity. And so we have retained it even though we are have returned to in-person hearings as well. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So in addition to that virtual method, during the same period of time, we will have public hearings that are in person. Instead of one central event, we have provided each region of the county, Western, Mid-County, and Desert, with its own public hearing. The location of the public hearing has been determined by each of the regional mental health boards within that region. So the public hearing in your pocket videos will be posted this year between May 20th and May 31st. The in-person hearings will take place during the same time. The specific dates are still being negotiated with our program staff with those venues. Hearings will be preceded by community forums. Forums allow people to have additional time to learn more about the act, more about the components, and more about the programs within those components in Riverside. Folks can walk between component education stations and talk to MISA administration team to ask whatever questions they may have before attending the public hearing and offer testimony. You'll move on to the next slide. So what happens to my feedback? What happens if I provide feedback? What's done with it? By regulation, the MHSA public hearing is conducted by the Riverside County Behavioral Health Commission. The Behavioral Health Commission is an advisory body composed of volunteers appointed by the Board of Supervisors. They work in conjunction with the department to ensure citizen oversight of department operations. So they are the conductors of the public hearing, so they will hear your comments if you attend a public hearing. All community feedback to the MISA plan, whether it's at the public hearing or through that posting process, whether it's written or verbal, is reviewed by the Behavioral Health Commission for a formal response. All comments and responses become a chapter in the final plan of the document. The final plan is then sent to the Riverside County Board of Supervisors for their reading and review and for their final approval. Upon approval, the plan is submitted to the state. Feedback is used to inform program development. Some smaller recommendations may be adopted earlier, but larger recommendations need greater community support and time to develop. You can go on to the next slide. If you're interested in receiving updates regarding the public hearing or other MISA program activities, these are the contact information for my immediate administration team, my management team. You can contact any of us at any of those particular email addresses or call that central phone number to be asked to be put on our distribution lists for these upcoming distributions, for these upcoming email distributions. There's also a marketing campaign for the Mental Health Services Act public hearing process itself. And so if you look to our social media, you will begin seeing postings regarding how to participate. So my next part of my presentation is geared towards the Behavioral Health Services Act, that new proposition I mentioned earlier on. But before I move on to that presentation, I want to know if anybody has any current feedback or questions about MHSA or about our plan update or stakeholder participation. And if somebody put something in the chat, I'm going to ask Dakota or Misty to let me know because I can't, it's not up on my screen.
Nothing in the chat, David. This is Dakota. On the crisis, the very first thing you spoke about, the crisis moving to 24 hours. Did you say 70% of like 911 calls are diverted to crisis? What was that again?
70% of the calls in which they're called out upon to be able to assist are diverted away from inpatient hospitalization or law enforcement intervention. So instead of the police taking somebody to the hospital, which is normally what happens, folks will be able to divert people from that experience by hooking them up with resources earlier on and spending time with them. The initial contact from a crisis team member tends to be towards de-escalation and problem solving.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we move on to Behavioral Health Services Act? All right, I will move on. So Misty, if you can give us to the next slide. So what is the Behavioral Health Services Act? It is going to be on this March 5th ballot. So for folks of you who have already may have voted by mail, that may have already been something that you addressed and had sent in, or who might be completing it this weekend for drop off, or because you're going to go vote in person on election day. It's all coming up very soon. The Behavioral Service Act actually has two elements to it. The first element I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because it doesn't pertain to my particular role in terms of educating on MHSA, but it's important for you to know. The first component is a bond measure, or first element is a bond measure on this ballot proposition, which would increase funding for more acute level of care or residential or institutionalized care. So as I mentioned in our presentation about Riverside having a second augmented board and care, that's one level of care that would add additional funding for counties to be able to build out of. So augmented board and care, One of the first levels of locked care is it's an old name. It's called the Institute for Mental Disease, or an IMD. It's kind of like a nursing facility for folks with psychiatric needs. That level of care, those beds have depleted over time. And then there's other degrees of residential care in between there, and then all the way up to state hospital beds. All of those over a course of time have diminished, which leaves some people waiting for long times to get that level of care if they need it. So you may have heard stories about people waiting in psychiatric emergency rooms because there's no local county acute hospital bed. This would build out those kind of hospital beds so that we can hopefully not have those kinds of waits anymore. So that's the bond measure that's tacked onto this. But the Behavioral Health Services Act goes towards reforming the Mental Health Services Act, what I just kind of all reviewed in the first section of this presentation. Again, it will be on this March ballot. If it passes by the voters, it will go into law on January of 2025. BHSA changes the components from those 5 that we just reviewed to 3. Those 3 are housing, FSP, or full service partnership, and behavioral health services. BHSA has made it clear in their language that this includes services for people who need treatment for substance use disorders. And it has a strong focus on services for the unhoused and for youth. We move on to the next slide. BHSA doesn't just reform MHSA, it overhauls the whole current behavioral health funding system. It puts all current behavioral health funding and how it's planned, measured, reported, and accounted for into one document, both for program description and regulatory compliance, as well as accounting for expenses and how the money is used. BHSA creates greater state oversight and approval, such as creating a list of evidence-based practices a county can choose from, defining central metrics to measure progress, gives the state the authority to direct plan revisions, and the authority to implement sanctions when counties are out of compliance. The legislation was written very quickly and with multiple amendments, and the state acknowledges that if the proposition passes, additional amendments will be needed to refine language. If the proposition becomes law, the Department of Healthcare Services, or DHCS, will be tasked with developing the corresponding regulations that will create the practical application of the law. Okay, go on to the next slide. The first component in BHSA is housing. It represents 30% of the BHSA allocation. It is primarily focused on the chronically homeless with a focus on encampments. Funds must be spent on actual housing, on buildings or rental assistance. Up to 25% of the housing dollars can be spent on new housing developments, but this requires the state's approval. The dollars in this component cannot be spent on services or supports for people who are unhoused or newly housed. So outreach services, system navigation services, supports, and treatment must come out of the other 2 components. The second component is full service partnership, or FSP. It represents 35% of the county's Behavioral Health Services Act allocation. This component represents the same FSP services that are currently a part of the MISA CSS component, but with some additional oversight. The state will require the county to use specific evidence-based practices. It will require field-based substance use disorder services like medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. The state will develop specific metrics that determine when a client should be in an FSP and when the client is well enough to transition into less intensive levels of care. The third component is called Behavioral Health Services. It's 35% of the total funding allocation. I look at this one as kind of the kitchen sink component in that everything else not previously mentioned goes here, but it does exclude some programs that are currently authorized under MHSA. There is a heavy emphasis on billing for services so that the state can draw down federal matching dollars. So what happens that every time Medi-Cal is billed, the federal government comes down, that's a state program. So every time we bill towards the state, towards Medi-Cal, the federal government matches those dollars. And so the state gets an influx of additional funding when we bill through Medi-Cal. And so it wants to make sure we're maximizing that Medi-Cal billing so that we get the maximum amount of money from the federal government. 51% of the funds in this component will be spent on early intervention. This can include services that prevent, respond, or treat behavioral health crises. Otherwise, county-based prevention and stigma reduction have been excluded. 51% of the funds must be used on youth under the age of 25. Funds for workforce education and training, capital facilities and technology, and any innovation projects would come out of this component. Innovation projects can be within any of the components, but would be funded out of this one. The state has also increased its administration portion of the funds. So after the funds are collected, before they're redistributed to the counties, the state takes off kind of an off-the-top percentage it uses to administer the act at the state level. That amount of money will go from 5% of the collected funds to 10% of the collected funds, but will expand what the state does with it. In addition to administering the act itself, these additional funds will create an innovation partnership fund for special projects, provide for some central workforce initiatives, and fund population-based or underserved cultural population-based prevention. What these programs will look like or how these funds can benefit each county individually is not fully clear at this time. As indicated earlier, BHSA also changes planning and reporting requirements for the county. The first report affected by BHSA would be the first new 3-year plan, which is due in July of 2026. This would require that all behavioral health funding used by the department is reported in one location. Though the annual updates are still required every year, the community stakeholder process would only be required for the 3-year plan. But the stakeholder process would expand in that 3-year plan to include regional stakeholders like managed care plans, local health jurisdictions, and the 5 most populous city governments in the county. Those cities, based on current data, would be the city of Riverside, Moreno Valley, Corona, Murrieta, and Menifee. Account reporting would also follow the same reporting structure, so how money is spent, the financials essentially. But it puts all those same funding streams in one reporting document, along with other specific data points, including service utilization rates, progress on reducing disparities, and the status of workforce development. And that is my snapshot of the about 300 some page legislation that is called the BHSA proposition. So that's the end of my formal presentation today. I know that's a lot of information to kind of absorb and take in, but does anybody have any initial thoughts, feedback, or questions for me? And if something comes up later, you're certainly welcome to be able to kind of shoot us an email or to route them through Dakota. So that we can get you some additional information on any of the things that I covered today.
I wanted to say that I used Take My Hand twice, and I found it very helpful, and they're actually caring and they want to help you get through your problem and help you find a solution.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. It's always good to be at the administrative level and hear the things that my administrative responsibilities end up in that direct service and that somebody used that and they had a good outcome, because that's the whole point. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. Dakota, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, since we are serving people with disabilities, I did want to mention, and I put in the chat, or I'm going to put in the chat for accessible voting. In fact, I'm going to play this 3-minute accessible voting video.
We are the County of Riverside Registrar of Voters. Join us as we guide you through our new voting system. When going to your polling place, you may see this new machine. We call it an Accessible Voting Unit, or AVU, and it is a ballot marking device, available for every voter to use. After the election officer activates your ballot session, step up to the screen and select the language of your choice. Your ballot will appear. There is a settings toolbar at the top of the screen. You have the option to change settings like language, where you can change to English or Spanish, text size, to change the font size, and a view page option, to adjust the color contrast, like what we're viewing now, black on white, or white on black. Each ballot contest displays the contest name and the maximum number of choices allowed for that contest. Press the box to the left of your selection to mark your choice. To change a selection, press the box again and a new choice can be made. If there is a write-in candidate, in the candidate list press the write-in space. A keyboard will appear on the screen to allow the write-in candidate's name to be entered. The name will appear in the write-in space. Use the next and previous buttons located at the bottom of the screen to move forward or backward in the ballot. To review choices made, press the review button at the bottom of the screen. Selections can be reviewed and changes made prior to printing the ballot. An additional feature of the AVU is its audio voting session. Simply request the election officer enable audio mode. You then select your preferred language and accessible voting device, ATI, paddles, sip and puff or audio-visual mode. Upon initiating the audio voting session, instructions will be heard through the headset to assist in navigating the ballot. The ATI is easy to use. With it you can adjust the volume, speech rate, make your selections and if necessary, replay the instructions at any moment. With privacy mode, a black screen appears where the ballot contest area would be. Audio voters may activate or deactivate the privacy mode at any time. If you are satisfied with your selections, proceed to print ballot. A confirmation window is displayed when all choices have been made and the ballot is ready to print. Press print your ballot on the AVU screen. The voted ballot will print automatically on the printer. You can see your selections on the printed ballot. Remember, the ballot is not considered cast until it is deposited into the ballot box.
That was easy.
We welcome all our voters to use our new voting system the next time they go to their polling place. And remember,
if you have any questions, we're here to help.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you knew about the accessibilities, and once again, they're in the chat. But I saw, Pete, what you put in the chat, that you vote for Vincent Price. I'm confused.
That was
All
one
right.
of the selections on the
Oh,
examples that they went through. They had Vincent Price and a few more actors.
I didn't even see that. All right, then just a couple final things. The mail-in ballots can go in now. They just have to be postmarked by Tuesday. And tomorrow, Saturday, they are opening 131 new voting centers in addition to the 400 or something that they have already. And that is all. That's all I had on voting. Thank you, Tana, for letting me do that.
Thank you, Dakota. Let's move on to our trivia contest for the Starbucks card. Today is the birthday of the Peace Corps. It was established March 1st, 1961 by which U.S. president? A. Dwight D. Eisenhower, B. Richard Nixon, C. John F. Kennedy. Please put your answer in the chat box or you can say it over your mic.
What was C, Tana? Was that Kennedy?
C was, yes, JF Kennedy.
We might have a winner in the chat.
I'm sorry, I can't access the chat box.
Oh, okay. So Glennis is our winner. Congratulations, Glennis. It was Kennedy, which kind of, you think about the cool 60s, right?
So if the winner could please give us your snail mail so we can mail you your Starbucks card.
You know what? Actually, since it's Glennis, I will drop your card off tomorrow, Wednesday, when I'm in for the BHC meeting. Glennis, will you be at Ruston next Wednesday? Okay, I'll drop off your card then.
Congratulations.
Yay!
Nixon said the Peace Corps catered to the young men who wanted out of the military draft. Eisenhower called it a juvenile experiment and suggested the members should be sent to the moon. Let's move on to unfinished business. We have 3 logos to pick from. We're not picking today. We're not voting today. We are going to think about which logo we want to pick and vote next month on April 4th.
So yeah, thank you to everybody who voted this month on the 15 different logos. We narrowed it down to these 3, and I will send out an email, and we'll just take votes for 30 days, and then at our next meeting, April 5th, we will have the winning logo, which we can still alter a little bit if you like. But if there's any discussion now, if there's any feedback on any of these 3 logos, we can have a bit of a discussion now if you like.
They're all beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Rachel put the 3rd one. She likes the 3rd one. That's my favorite too. In the chat. Thank you. All right. Well, we'll send that email out. And once again, thanks to everybody who helped us narrow it down. Oh, Pete likes number 3 too. Awesome.
Now let's talk about new business. The Autism Acceptance Walk.
I'll jump in here. This is Dakota, and Autism Society Inland Empire has announced their 2 walks. The first one, April 20th in Paris, and October 26th in Cathedral City. Now we can sponsor, they've asked us to sponsor. We've sponsored previously 2 years. We can sponsor each one, or we can sponsor one for $500. But if we sponsor for $800, we get both of them. So it's up to you. Oh, you know what I'll do is I'll launch this poll on if you want us to sponsor for $800. Let me throw this poll up. And then I have the video, which is the highlights of last year's Autism Walk that I'll play while you're voting. But first, let me get this poll launched. I'm going to go ahead and just take the votes. Let's see, share results. Here we go. Oh, we got 100% on yes, we'll be sponsoring. You know what that means, Tana?
What does that mean, Dakota?
We need help in staffing the table.
Yes, we do. Do we have any volunteers that would like to come in and help set up and take down and hand out flyers and play some games? We need them for the desert and for Paris.
Yeah, Paris is at was it the Railway Museum? Let me look here and see. Southern California Railway Museum. Tana, will you come and help at one of them?
I will help with the Paris one.
Paris, okay, great. And I guess that's, oh, I have one more thing I want to mention, which was last weekend. We, yeah, I'm showing. We we tabled an event. It was for the State Council on Developmental Disabilities and the Teamsters, Local 63. And so it was a health and wellness fair last weekend at in Bloomington, which I've never been there before. But here was our table, and that is our ASL interpreter who was helping us. So if you were to come to the Autism Walk and help us, that's our table, and you could just do the disc drop game with people who come by to say hi and just give out flyers. And we are getting ready for this, Tana.
Yes, we are. We are just moving along today. Our next meeting is April 5th. Would we like it in person or on virtual?
Let's see if that poll got launched. Good. And this is a two-step poll. Shall we meet in person or Zoom? And then scroll down, because if we do meet in person, we're asking which region of the county you would like to meet in. Western, Mid-County, or Desert. It's up there now?
Yes, it is.
Actually, it's just showing the results. It is the right one. Okay, looks like, I don't know how that happened, but it looks like 100% on Zoom. So we're meeting on Zoom on April 5th.
And let's open up to roundtable. Does anyone have any flyers or events you would like to share? Daisy, what would you like to share, please?
Yes, I want to share our Riverside County Health Coalition meeting that we have quarterly. Our upcoming meeting will take place April 17th. And it's going to be here in the Coachella Valley area. I say here because I'm in the Coachella Valley area, in the Thousand Palms Community Center. We previously have been meeting in Moreno Valley, but we're doing a traveling coalition this year. So we're hoping to take it to different supervisorial districts, the first one being here in Thousand Palms. We're very excited for those that join us on our April meeting. We had a conversation regarding what were some of the priority areas that our community partners and community members wanted to emphasize in terms of building different subgroups and subcommittees. So we're going to be providing an update regarding the analysis of that information and the data. We're also going to be having different speakers and an update regarding our community health assessment, which leads to our community health improvement plan, and that's led by the community. So we want to hear more about the different priorities and the work that is going to guide us for the upcoming years. The title of this is The Future of Riverside County Health Coalition, Continuing the Steps Towards Action. I'll be providing the link to our registration in the chat. You can also join us via Zoom if you are not close to Thousand Palms or can't make it in person. So we hope to see you there. And more information regarding our speakers will be shared soon once we have that finalized. So I'll be sharing it here now.
Thank you so much.
And this is
And I did
ahead.
upload that to the Wade Drive, our shared Google Drive. And I am sharing the drive also in the chat now if you have documents you want to upload there to share. Go ahead, Misty.
This is Misty speaking. I did upload into the Google Drive already the flyers that I've also dropped in the chat for RUHSBH is having an inaugural poisoning and overdose awareness 5K walk. These are free events. There will be one in each region, starting with the desert in Palm Desert on March 27th, Riverside at Fairmount Park, April 13th, and in Murrieta, April 27th. All participants will receive a goodie bag, a race medal, a t-shirt. There will be guest speakers. Public health will be giving some overdose awareness statistics and other data. There will be community members sharing their experience in recovery from substances. And there will also be some family members sharing what it's like to have lost a loved one from a poisoning or overdose, along with a memorial for all of those who have been lost throughout the years. So it's going to be a great event to raise awareness. It is free, so hopefully we'll see you all there.
Thank
Mrs.
you,
Dakota,
Misty.
Misty, I have a question. So, when I think of poisoning, I think of children getting into the bleach right under the counter. So moving forward, is that going to be the new language around overdose?
For when it involves fentanyl.
Okay.
Since there's been a lot of accidental poisonings due to fentanyl being mixed in with other types of drugs. So those are absolutely, those are accidental poisonings from that. That's the language we'll be using going forward.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I appreciate
Mhm.
that. Oh, this is Dakota, and I do want to mention I was at the Native American Wellness Meeting, and they have an event coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow on the 16th of March. It's March. And this is called Tending the Land. And I should have had it ready to go and I didn't. It's going to be basically pulling weeds, but they put better language on it. Let me see if I can find it. But it's community volunteering. There's a lot of invasive Sahara mustard especially out here in the desert. Sahara mustard's really easy to pull because you pull it out and you get like a deep root. It's really nice. Like pulling other stuff is very frustrating, but Sahara mustard is creeping in and taking over where the San Verbena. We used to have beautiful rolling purple hills here in the desert, and we have some this year, but not the Sahara mustard's really interfering with it. So if you're interested, it's in Desert Hot Springs from 9 to 11 on March 16th, a Saturday. And just shoot me an email if you're interested and I'll get you the info. And I'll put my email in the chat.
Thank you, Dakota. So before ending our meeting, I would like to thank David Shaw. And I would also like to thank the interpreter. Once again, thank you for joining us today. This meeting is adjourned. See you all next month, April 5th.
On Zoom.
On Zoom.